as though that were the challenge we face, and with the Yazidis on Mount Sinjar we did. By robustly putting together the coalition of now over 65 countries who militarily are assisting to defeat Daesh, we took a significant step to prevent genocide. Explicitly, that was what the president said. We have a potential genocide, we have to stop it, and we moved to do that. And we have robustly helped support all of the displaced populations, the refugee populations, and have led the world in mobilizing resources, including at the recent pledging conference here that initiated, that resulted in over $2 billion of new commitments to help these populations. But since that time, we've begun to deal with the question, people either, they have to choose, do they want to go as refugees, the migrants someplace else, do they hope to return home? We have over 1 million people in the Kurdistan region who are waiting in Iraq, many of them wanting to return home, and we have been active in responding to the genocide determination to create conditions that would allow them to return home. Knox has been leading the efforts on behalf of protection of cultural heritage. We've been now beginning to arm and train some of the local defense forces of the different minority groups and who are going to be integrated with the Peshmerga and the government of Iraqi military forces. We'll be making plans in terms of moving into the Nineveh Plain, what kind of transitional justice modalities need to happen when people return home to former neighbors or others who have taken over homes or businesses, to prevent them from descending into sectarian violence. What kind of way are we going to be rebuilding the infrastructure so utilities are working, so that people will have security that they can depend on there, so that there will be schools and medical care for their kids. There is planning going on all the time in this area. So all of that was on the foundation of that genocide determination at the instruction of the Secretary, and we've been very proud to have played a role in helping to bring that about. And the conference that we held just 2 weeks ago and bringing together 30 countries across the globe to address these questions was also an explicit outcome of the genocide determination.
Saeed, name and outlet.
Yes, my name is Saeed Erikat. I write for Al-Quds Daily newspaper. It's a Palestinian newspaper in the Aqlabad, East Jerusalem. And my question to you, sir, if you could share with us some of the practical steps that you are taking to mitigate or reverse the perils faced by Christian Arabs in 3 places: in Iraq, which is largely as a result of the U.S. War on Iraq in 2003 on occupation and its consequences; in Syria, as a result of attacks by, overwhelmingly fundamentalist groups that are aided by the U.S. or its allies; and Palestinian Christian, as continued and unending occupation seems to go on forever, which you unbridledly support.
Well, I already have answered the question in Iraq in terms, Saeed, in terms of the robust effort we've made to create conditions to protect religious minorities. I would point out that if you look at those who are 127,000 refugees who have come to the United States from Iraq in the last decade, that 40% of them are minorities and mostly Christians who have come to the United States. But all of our efforts to allow people to return home, to do it safely, to ensure their security will be protected, benefits all minorities. But it certainly benefits the Christian minorities as well. We work very closely with the diaspora communities here to gather what information we can to supplement what we have from our own diplomatic sources and military sources and intelligence sources about what the needs of these communities are, and to be responsive to them. In addition, we remain the largest donor in terms of supporting the displaced populations, including the Christian populations in Iraq. In Syria, many of the areas that the minorities were most densely concentrated on were not areas that were in the early stages of the civil war most protected, as you know, and now more and more we're seeing those areas obviously being affected as well. I would point out that when up in the Hasakah area when the Assyrian Christian communities were attacked. Again, our intervention, military intervention from the air, together in support of the Assyrian militias and the Kurdish militias, were indispensable in terms of allowing those forces to push Daesh out of the areas that they had taken. So again, we're moving militarily, and we're trying to plan ahead for that time when people will have the option to return home. Many of the lessons we're learning out of our work in Iraq in this area are fully applicable to Syria as well. So the coalition of the groups that we've been dealing with, the conference that was held at the UN Security Council at the coordination of the former foreign minister of France, and then in Paris last summer, and then there'll be another, building on our conference, gathering the same countries, in a larger number of them in Spain, hopefully before the end of the year, are all aimed at evoking commitments from different countries, what they're going to do to allow minorities to return safely to their areas. In terms of the Palestinian Christian community, on my trip to Israel and Palestine, I met with a broad range of all religious minorities there, but almost every one of the major religious groups, the patriarchs of many of the groups, of the grassroots leaders, particularly was focused on some of the challenges the evangelical Christian communities face there, because they're not recognized under the Ottoman traditional construct of religious groups that are recognized by Israel, and so their status to marry people and their status to divorce people of the pastors of those churches, their ability to travel, to minister to their people is somewhat constricted, and we're working very hard to try and ease some of those restrictions. In terms of the broader issues, the political efforts of the United States to reach some kind of a peace accord remains indispensable in terms of fully allowing the rights of all involved to be able to thrive and be protected, and we continue on that front as well.
Sir, right behind you.
Abdurrahman Yusuf from Egypt. My question is, does the USA consider the examination in arrests against the individual Islamist or youth of Muslim Brotherhood of help to advance religious freedom in Egypt?
The President al-Sisi has done a number of things regarding religious freedom. Let me just give a broader context on the Egypt situation. The Copts in Egypt still face significant challenges. However, President al-Sisi has, taken a very public position that the Copt community needs to be protected. He's gone twice to Christmas Mass. He's talked openly. Where they were talking about Muslim Egyptians or Christian Egyptians. These are all Egyptians, and he's helped to rebuild many of the churches that were destroyed in the violence of a couple of years ago. So while Copts still face enormous challenges, particularly in the more rural areas here, there's been a change there. He's also called on Muslim leaders to be more assertive and robust about putting forward a more traditional view of Islam as he understands it here, to contest the extremist interpretations that suggest that violence is justified by the Islamic tradition. Violence against innocent people is justified based on their difference of religious views on these issues, and that has led to some very important changes. We're seeing it in the textbooks that are being changed in to mitigate extremist pro-violent messages in the textbooks. So there have been some improvements that as well. We believe whatever entity people belong to, if they are prepared to express their religious life peacefully, they ought to be allowed to do that. And across the world, we have said to rulers that we have the connections and the influence to make a difference. We've said to them, we urge you in responding to legitimate security threats not to be overbroad in repressing peaceful expressions of religion that may be unpopular with you, because it drives it underground, it diminishes transparency, it fills those people with frustration and anger, it leads groups to give up on believing they can live out their lives in accordance with the laws of the land, and it is simply a strategy that divides society along sectarian lines and religious lines and undercuts the stability of a society. The question is whether they are peaceful or whether they are advocating violence in their life. So that would apply as much to the members of the Muslim Brotherhood as it would to any other group.
So we have time for two more. We'll go to gender and then Michael Lauber.
This is Tejinder Singh from Indian American Times and a bunch of Indian television stations. I don't have to repeat what is very well put in the executive summary and while going through the rest. I have just two questions. One is, this is a new thing, this Muslims being attacked in India for that beef ban, cow slaughter, and most of the cases it is some other kind of meat. And the second one is the NGOs facing, what has been going on with their money coming in, and if they are not exactly catering to the whimsical directions or directives of the Modi government. So, and if you go through the summary and on India, the word Gujarat keeps coming up repeatedly, and that whatever happened during when Narendra Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, and today he is the Prime Minister of Gujarat, and it seems to a layman that that India is being converted into Gujarat. Like not 1 week passes without my inbox seeing something somewhere Christians being attacked or having the problems in India. Now, when you talk about all this ISIS and ISIL, these are the people who are doing genocide. They are not governmental. And you have invited Prime Minister Modi here in 2 years 4 times. So, and then today you come out with they are sitting in Delhi and laughing at your report if there is no follow-up action to do something about this.
President Obama traveled to India. He gave a major public speech in which he was very clear about the need for religious freedom in India that could be exercised without people being subject to violence, urging the government to ensure that all people were able to safely live out their religious lives. We have been clear in our engagement with India about our concerns about those times that the government has been slow to react when violence has taken place, and some of those controversies over the cows are an example of that. There have been other times where President Modi has spoken out and has spoken out very forcefully about the need to protect religious freedom for all and the security for all. So I think we've been clear about our view of what is needed and our willingness to be supportive in confronting the challenges to religious freedom that need to be addressed there, and and when the government's been slow to react, urging them to be more assertive on that, et cetera. So when he has promised to ensure that everyone has I'm quoting him now, the undeniable right to retain or adopt religions of his or her choice without coercion or undue influence. This is responding to some of the attacks on Christians because they are seen as proselytizing and encouraging others to convert. Here, it is we've been clear and consistent in our messages about the things that we think are most helpful for the stability of the region and the stability of the country, and we'll continue to be supportive of those efforts where he is acting in accordance with the international obligations of India in these regards. So.
Mr. Lavers, I'm sorry, to gender, we're just going to wrap up.
Michael Lavers with the Washington Blade. You had mentioned earlier in your comments that there's a, quote, major debate about religious freedom here in this country. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you about evangelical preachers and other folks from this country who promote anti-LGBT efforts in many countries overseas. I think of Jamaica, Belize particularly, some of the countries in Africa, Uganda. Do you have any position on that? And I know the administration has spoken out, but do you personally have any position on these folks who are promoting anti-LGBT efforts overseas who are from the United States based on religion?
First of all, my personal views that you're asking for are not relevant to this. I'm here to speak on behalf of the United States government that has been quite clear on the issue of protecting the LGBTI community across the globe, that people ought not to be discriminated against simply because of immutable characteristics or in terms of religious freedom, the most core central organizing beliefs of conscience that they hold. We have robustly protected that right. It would include the right of people in the LGBTI community to organize religiously and participate in their own religious life as well, and that's a long-held position that we have had. We equally defend the right of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of religion of those groups who differ with the position of the United States government on such issue to exercise those rights, again, so long as they do so peacefully. We believe in the free marketplace of ideas, that in the end, the vision that we hold about fundamental civil rights for all communities, including the LGBTI community, will prevail. But we protect the right of religious groups to express views that are counter views, both within the United States and outside the United States. The construct of our rights, our fundamental rights here, is that our fundamental rights are not absolute. There can be compelling interests in which the United States government has the right to say that the compelling need to limitedly curtail free exercise, fundamental freedoms, can be justified. They are rare, and our standard is, if there is a compelling interest, we have to pursue it in the way that least infringes on the fundamental rights. But just because, let's say, another country, to change your question from the evangelical groups to other countries that claim religious beliefs that to curtail the rights of women, of children, of the LGBTI community, et cetera, we believe we've taken the position that it is a compelling interest under international law and under our own legal system here to protect the fundamental civil rights of people, but to do it in the most limited way possible, and that would include allowing the right of people who differ to speak out on their rights here. So we will continue to pursue that scheme. Let me just say one other word. This will be the last time that I will take the podium under the Obama administration. Here, as the Deputy Secretary indicated, this administration has been so robust on this. I mean, just look at the structure here. Our office has significantly increased its staff. We've created the Religion and Global Affairs office as well. Together, that's over 50 full-time people working on religion and religious freedom here at the State Department, and working in concert with dedicated staff in every one of our embassies who is tasked to focus on religious freedom, to reach out to the religious communities who may face oppression or discrimination discrimination or limitation on religious freedom. This has an extraordinary impact in our being effective in our foreign policy to address issues of the role of the religious community in affirming our foreign, our fundamental values and our goals across the world, and to do so with a thriving sense of religious freedom and protection of religious freedom and belief for all peoples across the globe. I've been immensely proud of what this administration has done, and I've convinced I've seen firsthand how it has made a real difference in the lives of very real people all across the globe, and we will continue to push as vigorously as we can until, as I said, religious freedom becomes a reality for every person in every nation across the globe. So thank you all.
Thank you, and thanks to Ambassador Saperstein. Have a great day, everyone.
Tonight, C-SPAN's Issue Spotlight looks at trade deals, their impact on the economy, jobs, and the presidential election.
And we will defend American jobs and American workers by saying no to bad trade deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and unfair trade practices like when
the state of Pennsylvania have lost 1/3 of their manufacturing jobs since the Clintons put China into the WTO.
The program includes a look at NAFTA, the 1994 free trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada.
This will weld us together in the cause of more jobs for our people, more exports for our markets, and more democracy for our allies.
A discussion on how the Founding Fathers viewed free trade.
The fact that historically the United States simply was not a free trade nation. For most of American history, the U.S. is, in fact, a tariff-protected economy. This goes back to our very Constitution.
And an in-depth examination of the World Trade Organization, the body that enforces global trade rules.
At the time the WTO was being negotiated, or its evil smaller sister, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, 800 more pages of specific rules and regulations, nothing inevitable here. My book would be very different. When these two were being negotiated, the U.S. had as official advisors 500 corporate advisors.
Watch our Issue Spotlight on trade deals tonight at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN and cspan.org.
In his weekly address, President Obama talks about clean energy and combating climate change. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa delivers the Republican response. He talks about bipartisanship in Congress.
Hi, everybody. One of the most urgent challenges of our time is climate change. We know that 2015 surpassed 2014 as the warmest year on record, and 2016 is on pace to be even hotter. When I took office, I said this was something we couldn't kick down the road any longer, that our children's future depended on our action. So we got to work, and over the past 7.5 years, we've made ambitious investments in clean energy and ambitious reductions in our carbon emissions. We've multiplied wind power threefold. We've multiplied solar power more than 30-fold. In parts of America, these clean power sources are finally cheaper than dirtier conventional power. And carbon pollution from our energy sector is at its lowest level in 25 years, even as we're continuing to grow our economy. We've invested in energy efficiency, and we're slashing carbon emissions from appliances, homes, and businesses, saving families money on their energy bills. We're reforming how we manage federal coal resources, which supply roughly 40% of America's coal. We've set the first ever national standards limiting the amount of carbon pollution power plants can release into the sky. We also set standards to increase the distance our cars and light trucks can go on a gallon of gas every year through 2025. And they're working. At a time when we've seen auto sales surge, manufacturers are innovating and bringing new technology to market faster than expected. Over 100 cars, SUVs, and pickup trucks on the market today already meet our vehicle standards ahead of schedule. And we've seen a boom in the plug-in electric vehicle market, with more models, lower battery costs, and more than 16,000 charging stations. But we're not done yet. In the weeks and months ahead, we'll release a second round of fuel efficiency standards for heavy-duty vehicles. We'll take steps to meet the goal we set with Canada and Mexico to achieve 50% clean power across North America by 2025. And we'll continue to protect our lands and waters so that our kids and grandkids can enjoy our most beautiful spaces for generations. There's still much more to do, but there's no doubt that America has become a global leader in the fight against climate change. Last year, that leadership helped us bring nearly 200 nations together in Paris around the most ambitious agreement in history to save the one planet we've got. That's not something to tear up, it's something to build upon. And if we keep pushing and leading the world in the right direction, there's no doubt that together we can leave a better, cleaner, safer future for our children. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Hi, I'm Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. Now consider this. On the first Senate bill debated in 2015 under a new Republican majority, the Senate considered more amendments from both sides of the aisle than the entire previous year under the leadership of Harry Reid. That is the dramatic change in the way business is done for you, and it's working. As chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I worked to make sure that the committee works for all Americans. So I adopted an approach to get things done for you, straight from the common sense nature of Iowans. I decided early on that the Judiciary Committee would spend your taxpayers' dollars and our time focusing on areas where we can reach an agreement rather than on political fights destined for failure. It's the right thing to do, and it works. Every one of the 27 bills passed out of the committee under my leadership has had bipartisan support. The President has signed 12 of those bills into law. Our committee's approach expanded access to justice, prioritized public safety, and demanded accountability from the bureaucracy. Republicans and Democrats collaborated to enact legislation and to help communities heal the wounds of addiction. We worked to reduce the illicit market for sex trafficking and modern slavery and expanded support for its victims. We empowered first responders to more safely and effectively answer the call to protect communities. We protected inventors and entrepreneurs who fuel innovation and job growth that drive the economy of Iowa and the rest of the nation. And we expanded government transparency to make the federal government more accountable to the American people. These are just a few of the bipartisan bills I've led through the committee that have become law. They're helping Americans from diverse walks of life. With 4 months left in this Congress, the Judiciary Committee has already outpaced the previous Congress in bills processed in committee, passed in the Senate, and signed into law. And we're not done yet. We're pushing ahead on legislation for all ages. We're making significant progress on a bill to prevent troubled youth from entering a life of crime and steer them towards a path of opportunity and productivity. And we're moving a bill to reduce crimes against seniors by expanding education, prevention, and prosecution. I've worked with colleagues to keep better tabs on convicted sex offenders and ensure evidence is properly preserved to improve justice for victims. I'm working with a diverse group of senators to recalibrate sentences for low-level drug offenders while keeping violent criminals off our streets. We've empowered government whistleblowers in their efforts to tackle fraud, waste, and abuse in government. Whistleblowers know what's wrong, and we ought to listen to them in order to get things fixed. So, Republicans and Democrats can work together. Bipartisanship has allowed us to make meaningful progress on good ideas from senators on both sides of the aisle. This principle has ensured the Republican-led Senate hasn't wasted time or resources. Now, it's a formula for representative government that puts us to work for you.
Sunday night on Q&A, Clifton Rayfield, a documentary film instructor, talks about his students' award-winning documentaries, some of which have been grand prize winners in our annual Student Cam competition. He teaches at Jenks High School in Jenks, Oklahoma.
I'm not the kind of teacher who will look at something that's not very good and just go, oh, that's nice, you did a really nice job with that. You know, I'll say what's not working. And eventually, every single one of my kids makes a better piece than they did in the beginning. Every single one of them. And eventually the kids who do really, really well, they internalize all this stuff. So I no longer have to say it to them. Their own brain is saying these things to them.
Sunday night at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A.
Here on C-SPAN, The Communicators is next with a visit to U.S.-sponsored broadcast organizations that share news around the world. That's followed by a discussion on the Magna Carta and its impact on the U.S. Constitution. And at 8, our Issues Spotlight series takes a look at trade deals and their influence on job growth and the U.S. economy. This week on The Communicators, we visit the Middle East Broadcasting Network's headquarters in Virginia. MBN provides news to some 27 million people in the Arab world, as well as a U.S. perspective on terrorism and democracy. It's funded by Congress. We talked with executives and producers who described their work at Al Hurra and Radio Sawa.
Well, the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, MBN as we call it, is the corporate name for two TV channels, the Pan-Arab Al Hurra channel and the Al Hurra Iraq channel. Also, we have 8 Radio Sawa programming streams, 3 websites, and numerous social media platforms.
Why a separate Al Hurra and an Al Hurra Iraq?
Well, when Al Hurra was created, launched back in 2004, we were on the tail end of the Iraq War, and there was a belief that we needed focused Iraq-centric information, that there was a need to broadcast local news about Iraq, while the rest of the Middle East was served by the Pan-Arab channel.
How big is MBN? Budget, employees, bureaus?
MBN is about 600 employees, both here in the U.S. We have correspondents all over the Middle East and some in Europe too. We have a budget of about $110 million that's held relatively constant in recent years to support all of the different activities. We've maintained the staffing level, but we've done some internal reallocation to accommodate and adapt to some of the changes that have occurred in communications in the Middle East, particularly in the area of digital media.
What kind of technology do you use?
Well, we have a HD channel. We have some standard definition channels, but we use satellite delivery, which is of benefit to us because we're on the most popular channels in the Middle East, which allow the audiences to tune us in an unfiltered way. Our Radio Sawa channels are on FM in the countries where they're located, in those countries where we're allowed to have an FM channel. And of course, social media is on the World Wide Web, available to anyone, not just people in the Middle East.
So potentially, how big is your audience?
Our audience, as we have been able to measure it, we can't measure it in all the countries we're located, we can't measure it in places like Libya or Syria, is about 26, 27 million. That's people who consume our products on a weekly basis. The largest portion of that audience is TV, which is about 17 million. The radio audience is about 11, 12 million, and then the rest is our digital audience.
Brian Conniff, what's the mission of MBN?
The mission of MBN is to broadcast accurate and relevant news and information to the Arabic-speaking audience of the Middle East. We support democratic values by creating a broader spectrum of opinions and perspectives than would normally be available to the audience through indigenous media in the region.
But as an arm of the U.S. government, can you be critical of U.S. policy?
Certainly we can, and I would say we're not really an arm of the U.S. government. We're a private company. We receive a grant from the U.S. government to support our operations, but our editorial questions and issues are independent from the government. We decide what is newsworthy based on our own internal staff. Our news programs are driven by news events, and our other programs are driven by what we believe are the issues that we can add value. As I said before, we support democratic values, so we explore topics that other channels wouldn't, such as democracy, women's rights, government corruption, and so forth. Frequently, those topics are taboo in the local media.
Brian Conniff, is it one of the missions of MBN, is it to counter Islamic extremism?
Well, it's not directly to counter Islamic extremism, but it's assumed within our broader mission, and it is a very important component of the content that we pursue today. So I wouldn't say it's our mission, but it's the rise of extremism, violent extremism in the Middle East is the dominant issue facing the Middle East, may even be the dominant issue facing the world.
Is there a perception that it is U.S. government propaganda in the Middle East?
On some people's minds, that is the case. We've been on the air for 12 years now, and over that period of time, I think the audience has come to learn that it's not propaganda. We do strive to be balanced, but we provide topics, we cover topics, and we provide information that is not readily available. For instance, the American perspective. We don't promote the administration's agenda or policy, but we promote a discussion about it. We have people from think tanks and academic organizations that maybe think differently, and it's a robust conversation that the audience hears that they're not going to get from other media outlets. So at times it could be seen as critical, but it also shows that in America we can discuss issues, that people aren't always in agreement. And this is part of the American democratic experience, which we think is one of our important topics.
The importance of social media.
Can't be understated. It is growing rapidly, way beyond even my expectation. In fact, I heard a statistic last week that in Iraq, over 50% of the population in Iraq, the adult population, accessed the internet in the past week, which is a phenomenal statistic. And as a result, we have a robust presence on the various platforms in the Middle East. Facebook is the preferred platform. All our Facebook pages combined have followers in the realm of 13, 14 million people. We have on a monthly basis, on monthly average, we have about 1.7 reactions, Facebook term, of people engaging on the topic. We have about 8 million video views on Facebook on a monthly basis, on an average. So it is rapidly becoming the important way to get to the audience.
Are you letting people who watch MBN see the presidential election here this year?
Absolutely. That's one of our key. This is our third presidential election since we've been on the air, and it's a tremendous opportunity for us to show democracy in action this year. There's more action than maybe in some of the prior years. But it's the process that we cover, the selection of a candidate, the primaries, the conventions, and then the actual campaigns themselves. Our audience really enjoys that. Really, they can't fathom, because it doesn't happen in that region where we have this peaceful transition from one administration to the next. And I think it's one of the great benefits of Al Hurra. We present it in a way that other Arab outlets don't have the capacity or the understanding to do.
Are there any countries that prohibit Al Hurra or Radio Sawa?
Well, nobody prohibits Radio Al Hurra because it does come in through a satellite. There are some countries that don't make it easy to report. Some are just dangerous, that limit our ability to move around, places like Libya and others. But we have the ability to report from almost every country. Sawa is a little different because people listen to radio primarily through FM, and we have a large number of FMs, but by no means in all countries, and a number of countries will not give us the frequency, will not allow us to broadcast, despite our efforts to the contrary. So that does limit it a little bit, though with digital media, people can now stream Sawa even where we don't have an FM. So once again, the driving force seems to be digital in the Middle East. It's opening up new horizons for us.
What is Al Hurra and Sawa? What do they mean?
Al Hurra means the free one, and Sawa means together.
How much time do you have to spend working with Congress or working with the administration?
Well, as I said earlier, we're a private company. We're not part of the government. We are accountable to our stakeholders. The administration requests the budget, and the Congress appropriates the money. So we're answerable to them, and when they have questions, we answer those. But they respect our editorial independence, and I've never had a case in 10 years where somebody from the State Department or the Hill has told us what to do. And they give us the ability to have an independent editorial approach to these very difficult issues. And the system works. The system of giving us a grant and allowing us to practice with our proper due diligence journalism.
And Fran Myers, what is Al-Yum?
Al-Yum is our 3-hour news, information, and entertainment program that I launched in 2007, March 8th, no, 2009, March 8th, 2009. It's a big show. It comes live out of Dubai, the UAE, Beirut, Lebanon, Jerusalem, and Cairo on the Nile. It was created to connect us from here to there.
And what does Al-Yum mean in
It means
English?
today.
And it's 3 hours.
It's 3 hours live daily.
Monday through Friday?
Sunday through Thursday, because in the Middle East, Friday is the holiday for Islam. So we do Sunday through Thursday, and we're 16 to 19 GMT. So we're basically live from 4 p.m. Rabat time on Morocco all the way to Yemen by 11 o'clock at night.
And 5 different locations.
Including Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is our 5th live location. And the show, what makes it unique is that it's coming out of all those areas, and they're all seasoned journalists. And so we take whatever content we're talking about, and everybody is discussing it across the region. Since Al Hurra is a pan-regional television network, this really salutes what it is that we're doing. So we take that conversation, we're getting the information. If we're talking about terrorism as it relates to Yemen, to Israel, to Morocco, to Cairo, to every country within the 22 countries that we broadcast to.
In the last week or so, we're taping this interview at the end of April 2016. last week or so, what are some of the topics that you've discussed?
Well, we're discussing everything from the presidential elections, which is huge because obviously our president, whoever is going to be, plays a significant role in global politics. We discuss Syria every day. I mean, you have to discuss Syria every day. We discuss, and then we discuss all of the Iraq and all of what's going on with ISIS every day, as that relates to, of course, the Mideast. So we're very, very heavy. Unfortunately, due to the sad story of ISIS being in existence, anti-terrorism, the Syrian war dominates a lot of the news coverage. Al-Yom, however, is 40% news, and the rest of it is information, and then on the lighter side, entertainment. That's what makes Al-Yom Al-Yom.
Well, who are some of your competitors then, in those different time frames?
Yeah, okay, in those different time frames, because when you say, oh, we're government funded, we really don't have a competitor, that's kind of a different answer. But in television time, you have... because we're a 24-hour news network, there's Arabiya. Arabiya is a Saudi station, and Arabiya is a good Saudi station. They're not radical. They're very contemporary in terms of their broadcast and television. Sky TV comes out of Abu Dhabi. That's newer. And they have it, very buttoned up and good screen. Al Jazeera was once upon a time, you could say, from television talk, but they've gone through so many phases, so much has happened to them since the Arab Spring that they're way less than they were. France 24, really, I don't even call it a competitor. I personally don't think BBC Arabic is, because it's a different kind of TV. And at the end of the day, the other competitors are your locals. When you take local, I mean, your local Egyptian, your local Lebanese, because ever since the Arab Spring, not before, but ever since the Arab Spring, a lot of viewers go local because of what's going on. Meaning, if the bomb's coming and you're in Iraq, although we do very well in Iraq.
Are there any special issues that you deal with as a woman executive producer producing a Middle East show, or do you do segments that on issues women face in the Middle East?
Yes, you just hit on my, there's everything you do sort of as a blanket, your job, what you're asked to do, the show's the bigger mission. But for me, it's always been personally women's and children's issues. I'm a mom, I have 3 kids. So the Middle East is not a friendly, by our standards, it's not a friendly place for women and kids. So we have done an inordinate amount of stories about the difficulties of life across the Middle East, not only in Al-Yom. I just recently launched a show called Bimerago, which means, I didn't make up the title, but it's called One Woman is Worth 100 Men. Okay, so, and that is, we just launched it, and we're getting some nice press out of it already. And there aren't enough people telling the stories of how difficult it is to be a woman and a girl child. So how many stories have we done on child marriages? I can't even count. Over the 7 years on air with the High Volume and my other shows, I have another talk show I do too. 9-year-olds getting married, and and why, and when the traditions, and when will it change? And this government say it's not. Some governments don't do it, but everybody looks the other way. Not allowing the women to drive in one country. That's nothing compared to Yazidi girls who ISIS decided are going to be sexual slaves. And these girls are as tender as 14 years old. I've done several stories on one. We just won a finalist in an award series and this and that. So you can't do enough, because really in the Middle East, they're not telling that story enough. It's too sensitive, too close to home. Too many issues and cultural issues and tribal issues and all kinds of issues regarding it. So everybody kind of looks the other way, even though on paper some countries, well, we're not going to allow that. As an example, in Egypt, female circumcision is against the law. It's some 80% or something, which is an unbelievable statistic. Right now, Egypt is so dangerous. The sexual harassment is completely out of control. Then in my show, this one called One Woman is Worth 100 Men, one of the women just brought in the pink taxi. What is the pink taxi? It's the taxis are pink. You order them, not like hailing in the street. The drivers are only women who pick up only women, and they wear a pink t-shirt because there's so much, again, sexual harassment, rape, etc. So I try to do those stories in context to the overall mission, but if I had to do one, that's it. It will always be that, because it's not being, when in the volume of content, not enough.
And Nashwan Talib is one of the anchors for Al Hurra. What are some of the stories you're reporting today?
We do have a bunch of topics today. We do have President Obama's speech in Hanover in Germany, and we do have the development stories in Yemen and Egypt. In Yemen, there is a peace talk in Kuwait, held in Kuwait. We do have our correspondent right there, Imad Marzouki. We do have as well the demonstration in Cairo, in Egypt.
You're formerly a journalist in Iraq. How is it different here at the Middle East Broadcasting Network?
It's much different between working here and the Middle East. You feel more free here. You don't have any like I'm a news anchor right here, working since like 9 years. Nobody is asking me what to say and what to avoid, actually.
And now on the communicators, we're joined by Hassan Shweki. As executive producer of Al Hurra News, what do you do?
Well, I just make sure that we have as comprehensive a news agenda for the day as possible. Make sure that we've selected the right news items about the stories that are making headlines around the world, that are of concern to our target region, to make sure that we are treating those items in the best possible way to provide accurate information, in-depth analysis, to make sure that we have good line of questioning, whether we have interviews, if we have interviews, and to follow up on all issues that are, related to news making.
How many hours of live newscast a day on Al Hurra?
Combined together, we have 4.5. This is only the major shows, the half-an-hour shows and the 2 signature shows, but there are news summaries that punctuate the transmission on top of the hour, on bottom of the hour. Collectively, these would add up another 1 hour and a half. So we're talking about 6 or 7 hours collectively of news coverage.
Mr. Shweki, when you look at your coverage and you compare it to your old employer, Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya, what's the difference? Will people see a difference between these different networks?
Absolutely. This is what we hear from friends and family. We even hear that from former colleagues at Al Jazeera and at Al Arabiya. I hear this in job interviews that I participate in. I think the basic difference is the narrative. I think the basic difference is that we don't have a political agenda that we are pursuing in our newscasts. So content, form, and narrative, and the selection of news, everything about the news-making process is not driven by a preset or pre-planned news agenda. It's driven by newsworthiness and relevance to the region.
Where are you from originally?
Originally, I'm from Syria.
When you see what's going on, well, first of all, how hard is it to cover what's going on in Syria?
It's very hard because it's an armed conflict. It's very hard because it's very complicated. There are so many local, regional, and international players. And it's very hard because media organizations are barred from the country, are not allowed free access to all events and sources of information. So but the major difficulty, as with any other war or any other conflict in the world and throughout history, for any news organization is the conflict itself. Because there are so many conflicting views, there are so many parties involved in the conflict, and they all want to influence your coverage. So it's very difficult. It takes a lot of effort on our part to check and verify, to pursue sources of information in a place where sources of information are very scarce.
One of the things we've learned while we're here at Al Hurra, our Middle East Broadcasting Network, is that while the broadcasts are done in Arab, control rooms are spoken in English.
That's actually among the best practices across all newsrooms in the world. This is how it was in Al Jazeera, for instance. I can speak from past experience. It's, I think, because the system was put by English people. I think it went on to be among the best practices in the control room to select this international language of communication inside the control room. And it just went on. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Leila Bazi, what's your role here at Middle East Broadcasting Networks?
I oversee the current affair shows domestically and overseas, all the shows of MBN.
What are some of those current affair shows as you described?
We do have many types of shows. We do have daily or weekly shows that delve deep into current issues and news issues, and we do also have dedicated shows to women's rights, human rights, freedom of speech, lighter ones that they are informative, that then they talk about technologies, youth shows, and sports.
Do you ever produce programs that reflect life here in America?
Yes, we do. Actually, we do have a dedicated show that produces the Arab Americans in the U.S., and this is dedicated for the people in the Middle East to see how an Arabic person from any nationality, because it's cosmopolitan, this country, and you have all types of people, how an Arab can come to this country, how he can build himself or herself if they achieved or if they did not achieve whatever their actual life as Arab Americans in the U.S., and how they are trying to adopt between their traditions, where they come from, religiously and socially.
Now, Leila Bazi, there's been some incidences where folks who have become U.S. citizens have gone to fight for ISIS or attempted to fight for ISIS. Can you tell those stories as well?
Yes, we do, and we actually, in one of our shows, Delusional Paradise, we did have an amazing mother who spoke about her son. She's Canadian, and her son is Canadian, not originally Arab, but Canadian. She spoke about how her son joined ISIS, and from her we managed to get other stories of people who are in the US or in the Europe, not only in the US because it's global, how they are going back to fight ISIS and what really enticed them to go there. And we've done the same thing in the Middle East.
The name Delusional Paradise, are you editorializing a little bit?
Yes, in a way, yes. When you want to say things, you just say it, name it as they are. So it is a delusional paradise that these people are being promised, and at the end, it's not.
You're from Lebanon originally. How different is Lebanon from Syria or from Tunisia? We often think of it here in the U.S. as one region, but what are some of the differences?
There are a lot of differences. For example, in Lebanon, it is subjectively, I can say that it is one of the Arab words that has freedom of speech, between two brackets, if you want to call it freedom of speech, but better than any other Arab countries. We are multi-ethnics. We have 18 religious sects, so this is, you don't find anywhere in the world. And it's a very small country. We are 4 million, and we're accommodating refugees, and we live on day-to-day basis because of the war that we already had. So we've been there, we've done the war, we've done the revolution, so we've done all that, so we're living now day-to-day.
Omar Fakeki, what's your role here at Middle East Broadcasting?
I am the managing editor of Raise Your Voice Digital.
And what is Raise Your Voice?
Raise Your Voice is a campaign we launched in September 2015 to encourage people in the Middle East to engage and be part of the discussion over important issues in the region. including extremism, root causes of extremism, unemployment, human rights, women's rights, all these issues that are important to the Arab street. And Raise Your Voice includes or has several weekly and monthly TV shows, a daily call-in radio show, and the backbone for the campaign is our digital platforms, including the website, our Facebook page, Twitter page, Instagram, all the social media platforms.
So what are we looking at here right now? And how do you say raise your voice in Arabic?
ارفع صوتك.
Which we see right there.
Yes, this is our Facebook page where most of our engagement with the audience happens.
Facebook?
The Facebook page, yes. Where we have, as I said, we have TV and radio shows in addition to the website. So we put all our content on our digital platforms, including the Facebook page. And then we ask people to interact with the content. And to support that, we have a team of community managers who are working 24/7 to keep the discussion happening and give information to people when they have questions about the content or about the circumstances where we got the content. This is our Twitter page. We tweet roughly every 30 minutes. We tweet